starters, there are 17 accredited medical schools in Canada right now, and I say right now because there are quite a few new proposed medical schools that will be coming over the next couple years, but for now there are 17 official ones. And these range from the 2 medical schools in Alberta to the 1 in British Columbia to Manitoba, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, a couple in Ontario, a couple in Quebec, and the 1 in Saskatchewan as well. So each of these schools will give you the exact same MD degree, but they're all unique and different. They have different program structures, different curriculums, even just different learning environments depending on the province that you're in. And most importantly to this video, they all have different application requirements. And there is a lot to know and a lot of moving pieces, so I've broken it down into 6 main sections. So we'll start with GPA, then talk about MCAT, extracurriculars, Casper, references, and interviews, and these sections all encompass the Canadian medical school application experience. And then at the very end, I'll share resources and tips and tricks to guide you whether you're applying to medical school for the first time this year or you're thinking of applying sometime in the near future. So you hear a lot of people say that GPA is king, and they're not wrong. Your GPA in Canada is one of the most important parts of your medical school application. And each school does it differently. So for example, the Ontario schools kind of band together and use something called the OMSAS grading scale, where regardless of where you went for university, your grade, your overall GPA is kind of standardized so that no one has an unfair advantage over anybody else. Some schools will drop your lowest mark. Some schools used to do that, but don't do that anymore. Some schools will take your best 2 years of undergrad versus taking your entire 4 years, which some schools do. So it really depends on the school. But again, GPA is extremely important, and each school kind of decides how much weight they put on that and how they calculate your final GPA in the end. Another thing is that most schools have what I would term as a threshold approach to GPA. So they'll say 3.0 or a 3.5 is the minimum GPA that we'll consider. And so anyone with a GPA at that or above that mark can apply. But what is really important to know is that even though that is the minimum requirement, that may not necessarily be competitive for that particular medical school. So what I would recommend is for all the medical schools that you're planning to apply to, go on their websites and look for their admission statistics from the previous years and see the general average of what they accepted, maybe the year before or the year before that. So that'll give you a general idea of where your GPA should be to present yourself as a competitive applicant for that particular school. Now, I will add a caveat that if your GPA is not at that level, but you still meet the minimum requirement, don't let that discourage you from applying to that medical school. Because again, that number is typically an average, right? There will be people that got lower than that average, and there will be people that got higher than that average. And again, a really great thing about the medical school application process in Canada is that it is very holistic. So even though your GPA may be lower, you may have really great extracurriculars or a really great Casper score that can help you be a really well-rounded overall candidate in the end. Okay, so the MCAT is another metric that is used by almost all the medical schools in Canada to evaluate their potential future students. Most of you will know some of the basics, but it's 4 sections. It's about 7 hours long, and it covers a range of different topics from orgo to general chemistry, psychology, sociology, biochem, etc., etc. It is a really hard exam to do well on. It takes months to prepare for, but it's really important because it makes up a huge part of your overall application portfolio. So in terms of the individual school requirements, there are a lot of different approaches on how schools choose to incorporate the MCAT into their admissions process. Some schools like Ottawa, they don't even look at the MCAT. It's not part of their process. Other schools like U of T use like a threshold method. So they have this rule where if you get 125 in 3 sections with the allowance of a 124 in 1 section, they don't really care about the actual score that you got. As long as you meet those minimum requirements, you're considered, and it's not really thought of competitively. Other schools like Western and UBC still use that threshold method, but they still consider the MCAT competitively. So for example, UBC has a 124 across the board minimum requirement, but if you do better, you have basically a better chance essentially. So it's still considered competitively. Other schools like MAC do consider the MCAT, but they only look at one section. So they only look at cars, and typically the students that get accepted into MAC have exceptionally high car scores based on the fact that that's the only section they really look at. Okay, so moral of the story, it is really important to do well on this exam, not only to broaden the number of schools that you're eligible to apply for, but to also increase your chances of getting accepted, especially in those schools that consider the MCAT competitively. I mentioned this a little bit before, but the medical school admissions process in Canada is a holistic process. And basically what this means is that even though those hardcore numbers are really important, so your MCAT, your GPA, those are not the only things that the schools look at. They really want to know exactly who you are as a person and how you love to spend your time. So they'll ask you about things like your work experience, anything volunteer related that you've done, any awards you've received, research, publications, even hobbies, and just basically anything and everything that you've chosen to do with your time. And this is your opportunity to really give the schools an insight into your life and your passions. And again, because we're all individuals and because we're all different and unique, this will differ depending on the person. So for you, you may feel inclined to share the fact that you've played soccer or an instrument since you were 6 years old, or that you love skydiving, or that you love to knit or to cook, or that you started maybe like a small business around one of your hobbies. Personally, I love to video edit. I've been doing it for many years now, so that was one of the major things that I shared on my medical school application. And so nothing is irrelevant or too small to share. Just think about what you're really passionate about. Think about what you devoted a lot of time to, and that's exactly what the schools want to hear about. I know you'll hear a lot of people saying, oh, you need to have this, you need to have that, and don't listen to that, because the schools are not looking for cookie cutter applicants. They're looking for unique experiences and diversity. What is it that you bring to the class? What is it that you're passionate about? What is it that will enrich the medical school class that they're building for the following year? Okay, let's talk Casper. So Casper is yet another assessment method that some medical schools in Canada use to assess their applicants. It's basically a situational judgment test that evaluates a number of different things. So it evaluates collaboration, communication, empathy, equity, ethics, motivation, problem solving, professionalism, resilience, and self-awareness. And the format of the test sometimes changes year to year, but when I took it last year, there was a typed response section and a verbal response section where they give you a prompt and then you have like a certain amount of time to formulate your response on how you would act in that particular situation. And I think it's the same typed verbal format this year as well. There is no right answer. It's basically just like if A or B were to happen, what would you do and why? And again, the schools use this in an effort to get to know you beyond your MCAT, beyond your GPA. They just get to know you a little bit better. So you're scored based on quartiles, with the first quartile being the lowest and the fourth being the highest. And the schools differ on how they use it in their applicant scoring. Some schools, again, use like a threshold approach where if you get a certain score, then they don't really care. Other schools do use it competitively as part of their overall applicant scoring. And a really important thing to know about Casper is that you can only write it once in application cycle. So keep that in mind as you're prepping for it, that there are no do-overs for that particular application cycle. What you get is what you get. Pretty much every medical school in Canada will ask you for references of some kind, typically about 2 or 3 references, and these are individuals that are expected to speak to your character, whether that is your academic character or your social character. These references have typically supervised you in some capacity, like your boss at work or your volunteer supervisor, or even a coach if you played a sport. Okay, let's talk about reaching out to references. So it's really important that when you are reaching out to individuals that you're considering to be your reference, please make sure that you're choosing the right ones. One of the best pieces of advice that I heard when I was applying is that really make sure that you're thinking through who you're putting down for your references. Medical schools get so many applications, thousands upon thousands of applications in Canada every year, and there's no reason for them to take a chance on someone who has a wishy-washy or a floppy reference versus someone who has a glowing reference. I cannot stress this enough. I'm going to say it again. Make sure you're choosing people that are as excited for you to get accepted as you are, and that will speak very strongly in your favor. Just one little housekeeping thing. It is really important to keep politely following up with your references throughout the entire application process. Let them know what's required of them. Let them know what the upcoming deadlines are. That way everything is on the table and everything gets submitted on time. And lastly, and this is kind of self-explanatory, at the end of your application cycle, make sure you go back and reach out and say thank you for their support and update them on how everything went. This just goes a long way to show them how much you appreciated, how supportive they were for you throughout the entire process. Okay, let's talk interviews. So if you have made it to an interview, that is an enormous accomplishment that you should be so proud of. It means that you are so close, you're almost there, and the school is seriously considering having you as part of their class. And just like everything else we've talked about in this video, interviews look really different depending on the school. Some schools will use what is called a multiple mini interview format, or MMI for short, where you have a certain number of different stations with different interviewers, and you go from station to station answering questions throughout the whole interview process. Other schools will use the more traditional panel interview where you're basically face-to-face with 2 or 3 other people, where you're just having a chat and talking about, your journey to medicine and a bunch of different other things. And other schools will use a mix of different methods as well. So half MMI, half panel, or some MMI, some panel. So it really depends on the school, and it's just an effort to meet with you face to face, either virtually or in person, after they've identified that you've met all their other requirements. You've met their MCAT requirement, their GPA requirement, their Casper requirement, and they just want to get to know more about you as a person. So you might answer questions that are to do with ethics or situational questions, even just questions about things that you wrote about during the rest of your applications, or questions about you in general. And this way they can get to know the authentic you face to face. Okay, let's chat about a few resources I would recommend as you embark on your journey to applying to medical school in Canada. Let's start off with MCAT. So this will depend entirely on you and how you like to study, but here are a few resources that were really helpful for me. I actually started off my MCAT prep with Khan Academy. A lot of people don't know this, but they actually have an MCAT course on their website, and it was really great at the very beginning to get a basic understanding of some of the main concepts that I would need to know for further content review. For the bulk of my content review, I used the Kaplan prep books. I'm a huge visual learner, and so I liked how they set everything up in terms of their diagrams and their pictures. It was really great in terms of explaining things to myself and really getting a full grasp of the concepts. Then this one's kind of weird, but I used this app called MCAT King of the Curve. It kind of gamifies the whole MCAT study experience. So when I was busy or I was in between tasks, I would quickly go on my phone and answer a few game questions, and it was a really great way to kind of fill in the gaps and keep studying even when I was doing other things. And lastly, which is probably my favorite resource that I'm going to recommend to you guys today, it's the Med School Coach YouTube channel. I cannot thank this channel enough. They saved me in my last couple days of MCAT prep. I was realizing, oh my goodness, there are still quite a few things that I don't know, and I stumbled across their YouTube channel and they explained to me exactly what I needed to know. So I would highly recommend. Okay, let's talk about resources for extracurriculars. Now, this will entirely depend on you. You can choose one of many options: Notion, Google Calendar, Word, the Notes app, anything where you can type and organize every single thing that you've done for extracurriculars. Write down all the activities you've been involved in for as long as you can remember, and it'll depend on the school which of those you can actually include, but make sure you include what type of activity that is. So is it work, is it volunteer, is it a hobby? Make sure you include what you did. Keep like a running journal of things that you did at that particular activity. Write down how many hours you spent doing it, what your schedule was like, and most importantly, write down the name of a verifier, and that is anyone that can vouch for the fact that you were there, the fact that you did what you did, how many hours you spent doing it, and how well you did overall. So make sure you have a running list. I personally use Notion. It worked really well for me in terms of keeping everything organized, but you can choose whichever platform works best for you. Okay, in terms of Casper, I have two main resource recommendations. Number one, prepmatch. It is amazing. It is an amazing way to prep for the typed portion of the Casper test. You can evaluate other people's responses, and you can have other people evaluate your responses, and it helps you to step out of the box of your head a little bit and get other people's take on what you're communicating, and also see how other people are thinking about responding to the Casper questions. That way you can pick up on things that you would have otherwise missed, and it kind of broadens your worldview, it broadens your mind, so that when you're answering questions in the future, you're thinking about things that you would never have otherwise thought about. The second main Casper resource is to practice with a friend. Practice with someone that is also applying to medical school and is also taking the Casper test. That way you can practice for the verbal portion of the Casper test, and you can also, again, give each other feedback and see how you can better improve. Okay, for reference resources, I have drafted a quick request email that you can send out to your references to ask them if they're comfortable being a reference for medical school. Of course, I would recommend tweaking it a little bit depending on who your reference is, how much of an impact they've made on you, and why you think they would be a good fit to be your medical school reference. So here it is, and you can tweak it as much as you want. In terms of resources for interviews, two main things. I would recommend going online and finding practice interview questions. I used the ones from Bemo quite a bit. That just helps to give you a little bit of insight into what to expect. Obviously, it's not going to be exactly what you'll be asked, but it's good practice. And secondly, I would recommend using Zoom to record yourself answering some of those interview questions. To see if you are getting where you need to be. You can have someone else review them, you can review them yourself, and just make notes on, any areas of improvement, anything that you've been doing well and that you want to continue doing. And you can also do this in person with another applicant or with someone that you trust to give you honest feedback, just so you are getting that practice in and you know what to expect and what kind of questions you might be asked. Okay, now that we've talked about a couple resources, which I will link down below for you guys to review if you would like, I'm now going to share a few general pieces of advice that I wish I had known when I was applying last year. So number one, apply broadly. You will hear this quite a bit, and the reason why is we only have 17 medical schools in Canada, which means it's very competitive and it's very difficult to get in. So make sure you are giving yourself the best chance by applying to as many medical schools as you are eligible for. Do not limit yourself, apply to as many schools as you can. Again, a caveat for this, don't apply to schools that you're not eligible for. Don't apply to schools where you don't meet the requirements, because it's going to be a hard no and it's kind of a waste of money. But as long as you're eligible for a school, apply there, because you never ever know where you're going to end up. Number two, and this is extremely important, always review the requirements and deadlines. In fact, after this video, please go and make a list of all of the schools that you're applying to and write down exactly what the requirements are and exactly when the deadlines are, because you really do not want to miss anything. Again, because of how competitive this process is, it is quite unforgiving. So if you miss a deadline, that's pretty much it. There's nothing else that can be done. So make sure that doesn't happen to you and that you're submitting and sharing things with the schools on time. Number three is kind of sad, but it's also important. Learn how to deal with rejection. But that's okay, right? You are going to hear a lot of no's, but that doesn't matter, because all you need is one yes. All you need is one school to say, hey, you know what? we want you to come. We're really excited about you and we want you to be a part of our class. So really focus in on finding that yes rather than getting sidetracked by all the no's. Lastly, and very importantly, get your money up. This process is so expensive. Everything costs money, from the Casper test to the MCAT test, from the application fee. Sometimes you might even get charged for the interview fee as well. So please make sure that you are thinking ahead financially in terms of how you're going to afford paying for the medical school application process. If you are very early on in your journey, maybe you're in first year undergrad or maybe even in high school, you can start saving up little by little so that when it comes time to apply, you have the funds there available. If you are concerned about being able to afford it in general, there are a couple financial assistance programs with the MCAT, for example. So make sure you keep that in mind, that it is a very expensive process. There are resources available, but there's also the capability to potentially save for it over time so that when the application season rolls around, you're prepared financially for that. Okay, my lovely friends, that is everything I had planned for today's video. I know it was a doozy, it was a long one, but I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions about anything that was said in the video or any questions about the medical school application process in general, please don't hesitate to let me know. You can either comment down below or you can send me a DM on Instagram and I will be sure to answer to the best of my ability. If you are applying to medical school this year, from the bottom of my heart, I wish you all the best of luck. I know you're going to do awesome. I know you're going to do great, and I can't wait to see you as a part of a future medical school class.